It has been a long time. I should have met you. Namhlanje sishaya amazaza sikusama kushoda abantwana. Masenzani? All is the Lord. Enjani bazali? Today is the let me check the date. Today is July 12th. July 12th, 2023. It's in the middle of that boring election season. Election seasons are supposed to be exciting, but this one we're going through is very boring. I'm sure you agree with me. So now, what is at stake is our future. And the currency is stabilizing, it appears. The Zimbabwe currency is stabilizing. I checked some of the reports from the RBZ. They had 20 million on offer, some around 6 million was taken up, meaning the demand is now less because the market is already heavily dollarized, which is a good thing. Uh, and Chamisa's rally went ahead. It was very short. I saw the videos there. There were police that were demanding that he stops the rally, which to me was very uh, disturbing and telling at the same time. You see, I don't see energy that Nelson Chamisa is putting to push back at the gold mafia in Harare. In fact, it seems like they have put him in a tight corner whereby they said to him, okay, we'll allow you to do your rally for 10, 15 minutes or whatever and then go home. Meaning that the mafia in Harare, the elite in Harare are very scared. They are very terrified of what might happen to Triple C. I know already that Chamisa is captured. I wonder if his heart is fully in it, in the capture, but he's enjoying the money, or 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 he's just, or he doesn't want to be there, but he has got no choice but to be captured or to be told what to do. But I can see the paranoia in the ruling elite that they fear that if Chamisa is allowed to let loose and campaign freely, he might garner in very large crowds. At the same time, Mnangagwa, who gonna pass people from all over the country, will fail to have a huge crowds and therefore will not be able to justify an election victory for Iti Mnangagwa. As we know, if you're a Zimbabwean, you know the election results. We know what the results that are going to be announced are going to say. We don't need a prophet, all of us. We know what's going to happen. But then you see, for them to justify the election results, they have to have a campaign season that looks like as if AD had an upper hand, and Chamisa didn't have that upper hand. So allowing Chamisa to campaign will clearly paint that picture that the majority of Zimbabweans are supporting Nelson Chamisa, and it's going to be very hard for Idim Nangagwa to justify stealing elections, as ZANU-PF has always done, stealing elections since 1980, and they've got no reasons not to steal these ones in 2023. But they have tried on the level of election violence. I would like to give a one up to Itim Nangagwa for running an election season that has got very little violence. I have heard reports of violence. I still think it might be there, but it's not as much as we had in 2002 and 2008 elections. So it is much better. So after all, it is not as evil as most people think it is. But nevertheless, the election is stolen, the economy is stolen, the lives of my youth are still suffering and struggling. Whether the violence or no violence is still the same. What you need is a Zimbabwe where people are free. The economy must be liberalized. These elite must not use the political power or proximity to political power in order to skew the resources towards themselves and their families at the expense of everybody else, because that is what is happening in Zimbabwe. Everybody else in the market is competing, but those that have got the political power, those who have got access to Idim Nangagwa, are using that access for the purposes of benefiting themselves and their families. So we need that to change. So it is this desire, I need you to understand, it is this desire to participate in an open market that we seek in Zimbabwe. We don't seek to be leaders per se. Neither are we concerned whether it's Idem Nangagwa or National Chamisa who runs the country or whoever. But whoever runs the country must open the market, number one. Number two, use the governance, which is the center of power, for the purposes of redistributing wealth in a much more fair manner. Not to use the center of power as a means of extracting even private wealth to just a few, what Mnangagwa and his wife and children and friends are doing at the moment. So we need that kind of paradigm shift. But if I study history and see how elites in different societies have behaved, I do not see the elite in Harare willy nilly coming out and say, okay, Zimbabwe, you are free. Okay, it now takes a God Himself, because as I said, my name is Ngobani Zondo, and I'm a prophet of the Most High God. And God said to me, go and tell the Zimbabweans that they are free, meaning that that freedom is going to be delivered by God. God is going to do something which the elite do not want to see happening. Okay, unless if the elite themselves convert right now, as I'm speaking, they convert and they do the right thing. They know what the right thing is. Okay, they exactly they know, and the elite in Zimbabwe are not exclusive in the way that they behave. It's the same thing with the Russian oligarchs. It's the same thing with the Chinese billionaires. It's the same thing with the plutocrats in the United States and the city of London in the United Kingdom. They all behave the same way because that is how, perhaps I think that is human nature. That when someone is elite, they have got money, they use that money they leverage their money to get more political capital. That's what ZANU PF did, was they were accumulating in the 80s, 90s, and through some of the people that were in the army or JOC, those people began to accumulate political power as well for the purposes of extending their financial or economic muscle in the country. So right now we are seeing in Zimbabwe where that accumulation has become so excessive. It hasn't been restrained by anything, thereby leading the country to have a great suffering across the whole country. Almost everyone is suffering, and they've destroyed even the very institutions of the land itself for wealth extraction, such to extent that there's only one institution in Zimbabwe that functions perfectly, which is the passport office, because the elite in Zimbabwe have got a vested interest in Zimbabweans getting passports and getting the hell out of the country so that they can be stealing the gold and minerals, as well so that Zimbabweans can become slaves all over the world and then send forex through Mukuru and stuff like that. And by the way, this kind of arrangement is favored by capital in the city of London and capital in New York, because it is able to extract the value of Zimbabwean labor. This is a very key important point that most Zimbabweans really need to investigate. We need to interrogate this point very much. As I say, I always say good points here on this channel, but nobody really cares. Sometimes I wonder, am I the only one who cares about Zimbabwe? Really? Am I the only one? Because I tell you big points, but it seems like all of you are not listening. I'm wondering how you Zimbabweans are really wired. Because that's the thing. Zimbabweans, let me tell you, you are very valuable. Robert Mugabe did well with the education sector. He educated you and you became a high value employee as a Zimbabwean. Whether you're an employee or you're a businessman or whatever, but you are a high value person because of the policies of Robert Mugabe in the 80s and 90s as far as education was concerned. But now the problem is that instead of being allowed to have a governance system that allows you to propel and enter the upper middle class and become part of the of the emerging markets, what happened is that our distractors, the British and the others in the plutocrats in the United States, decided to back a governing party like ZANU PF. Did you want to say to back them, not to be to fight them? Sanctions are not fighting against ZANU PF. Sanctions are in actual fact enabling ZANU PF to stay in power. Sanctions give ZANU PF an excuse for the failed state of our nation. The failed state of our nation is for the purposes of cheapening this high value Zimbabwean person. Okay, whether you're a Zimbabwean doctor, Zimbabwean nurse, Zimbabwean teacher, whatever, you are high value. But because our country's governance systems have been destroyed, and only the passport office is working. We're able to get a passport and go to UK or USA or to South Africa, where there's also capital, the British capital, which is, I mean, the British capital is represented in Africa by South African capital, which is the so-called white monopoly capital, which has also enlisted some black people in the ANC, like Cyril Ramaphosa, whose interest is to keep Zimbabwe at a pariah state so that they can use the labor of Zimbabweans, the high value labor of Zimbabweans, and I mean, use it on cents on the dollar. That's what is happening in Zimbabwe. That's what is happening to the Zimbabweans, the people themselves. As far as the land is concerned, ZANU-PF and China and Russia will be extracting the physical resources from the land. You see, the Chinese, I mean, the Russian oligarchs are only good at one thing: extracting value from land. In Russia, they also own the mines and minerals in Russia, so they want to do the same. They want to replicate the same in Africa. We see that through Wagner Group, which is terrorizing Africa, pretending to be in aiding African leaders, when in actual fact they are there for the extraction of the minerals in Africa using Wagner. As you can see now that Prigozhin is at a fallout with Putin, it has become clear that Wagner Group really is a Russian asset, and Prigozhin was just a front for the Russians. So you see, the Russian oligarchs who do not build anything have never been in positioned to build anything but to extract. They're extracting in Russia. The Russia only economy only works as a mineral extraction economy, and there's not sophisticated or become deeper in any other or is not playing any other function except for wealth extraction, and they're doing it in Africa. And the point I'm trying to drive at is that I'm trying to help you Zimbabweans to map out the positioning of your multiple enemies, not just looking at ZANU PF as well, but how ZANU PF is aided by these entities, the Russians and the Chinese, who are interested in wealth extraction, the London capital, the city of London, which has got its representatives in South Africa, which is the white monopoly capital, which has now been joined by a small group of black elites who are part of the ANC. That is why you are seeing Fikile Mbalula supporting ZANU PF a lot, being anti-Chamisa, because Fikile Mbalula and some of his friends in the ANC have got interest in Zimbabwe and interest in keeping ZANU-PF in power, because they are also part of that wealth extraction from Zimbabwe. So it's not enough for the ANC to steal from South Africans, they are also crossing the border and stealing in Zimbabwe. That is why South Africa and the ANC are willing to keep Zimbabweans in South Africa. They are willing to extend the ZTP permits because they don't want Zimbabweans to go back to Zimbabwe. They know that if all the Zimbabweans in South Africa go to Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF will go, will get a lot of power. If ZANU-PF get a lot of power, Cyril Ramaphosa, Thabo Mbeki, and all those other guys that have got mines and gold mines, whatever economic resources they own in Zimbabwe, I will not allow them. When I'm president of Zimbabwe, I'm going to ask them, did you buy these things, and how sustainable is it for my people? So that is uncertainty about the government that is going to come next causes them to want the status quo to remain the same. So they will extend ZTP permits. And but then it's not about loving you Zimbabweans, but it is keeping you away, you Zimbabweans, it's keeping you away from your real wealth whilst the ANC is looting. So I need the Zimbabweans to understand that, do not celebrate being given ZTP permits. Rather, you must celebrate going back to your country and removing ZANU-PF from power. Fikile Mbalula loves it when ZANU-PF is in power so that they can carry on stealing. So you can see down south, you have got Fikile Mbalula ANC and the white monopoly capital in South Africa that actually wants to keep Zimbabwe in pariah using ZANU-PF. And then the things like sanctions that are coming from Washington and London, they are giving a legitimacy to the suffering of the Zimbabweans, so that ZANU-PF, their client or their boys, ZANU-PF, can have something, some excuse when the Zimbabweans are saying the economy is bad. ZANU-PF will say, when is the sanctions? but the sanctions function for that purpose, so that when they are extracting, they have to blame something. Sanctions. Imagine if there were no sanctions. If there were no sanctions, the country will still be suffering, will still be at a barrier, but then it will be difficult for ZANU PF to blame anyone else. So they need to shift the blame to someone, the British and the Americans. And then the Americans, who are also in the OG, benefiting from Zimbabwean cheap labor, also shift the blame to ZANU PF. So they are taking the ball back and forth, whilst the Zimbabweans are looking at Nelson Chamisa. And I'm saying that Nelson Chamisa has already been captured. He is part of the system. That is why he is still participating in these shameful elections, which I will not participate in, because they are shameful elections. Their only purpose is to legitimize the already illegitimate ZANU PF regime, this elitist regime that is hollowing out the middle class in Zimbabwe, hollowing out the professionals in Zimbabwe, and selling them for cents on the dollar on the international labor market. As I said, that's a very important point that Zimbabweans must be looking at, interrogating, and I'm wondering, and I'm surprised that nobody picks this thing up. Every time I speak, nobody really listens. I am flabbergasted at how Zimbabweans are so relaxed and they talk about things that do not matter, but then things that matter, nobody seems, or very few people, or their voices are very small. People who are concerned about these things. So it is very, very, very important to recognize that. And that is why some of us, we are not participating in these elections. They are shameful. They are for the purposes of legitimizing this illegitimate regime that will obviously rig the elections. And when they win, they will legitimize themselves to themselves and to the whole world and to the Zimbabweans. By the way, the whole world knows that the elections are rigged. But as I told you, that the international mafia is where the city of London and New York and the US capital enjoys as an OPF in power, because they can get us Zimbabweans for cheap labor. So this is a time when we Zimbabweans need God Himself. God is going to do something which I do not know. I do not know what it is, but the Lord is going to do something that is going to bring salvation and freedom. And I'm beginning to say that we as Zimbabweans, we keep on making a mistake of going to Britain and going to the United States thinking that they're going to do something to help us. No, they won't. On the contrary, the British and the Americans largely want ZANU PF to stay in power. That is actually the propaganda that has been fed to the Zimbabweans, to think that Britain and America, through sanctions, want ZANU PF out. They want regime change. No, 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 no. They don't want the regime change. Okay, they want to create this impression that they want the regime change, but in reality, they don't want the regime change. They want the regime to carry on as it is, and destroy the people of Zimbabwe. What God is going to do is going to bring harm to the elite in Harare. God is going to bring a weapon that is going to be very harmful to the elite in Harare. I do not know what it is. Okay, I'm just telling you what the Spirit of God is opening my eyes to see. Harm that is going to cause them to have no choice but to hand over power. Look at this, they will have no choice, because God has been giving them a choice so that He can also engraft them into the next level of glory. But then they are refusing to enter into the next level of glory because of their greed. They are greedy. What is his name? The president and the vice president. What's his name? Yeah, him, that guy. They are so greedy that they are not willing to usher Zimbabwe into a place where everybody makes profit and they also make profit. They are not willing at all. So that is what has angered God. Because also of their, God said before, God said to me that because of their, what is it called? Because of their arrogance. When the Lord keeps on sending prophets like me and others, telling them what to do, because of their arrogance, their belief, okay, their belief that nobody can remove them from power is the reason why God is going to remove them from power. Their belief, their arrogance, God says to me, they are sitting in this place, in this position where they feel like, who's going to remove us? We have got Chamisa covered. We have got the British and the Americans pretending to be hating us through sanctions when they're actually our friends who make money every day with us through various things like money laundering and all the other things that politicians do at the back door. So all of those things they give ZANU PF the this thing, this comfort of staying in power. And that is why when we Zimbabweans say set us free, when we say open the economy, don't arrest people, do this and that, they refuse because they say, "Uchaidechi, who are you gonna go run to? You're gonna run to the British and the Americans. You do not know they're actually our friends. So they are right. ZANU-PF is right. The Americans and the British, they are ZANU-PF's friends. Okay, and and the Zimbabweans is in futile. It's futility to run to the British, to run to the Americans. And by the way, if you're a Zimbabwean and then you run to the British and the Americans, ZANU-PF will punish you with their law. Now, not that the Americans are going to do anything, not that the British are going to do anything, and even ZANU-PF knows that their friends in Washington and their friends in London will not do anything to set Zimbabweans free, but but they will suspend you or put you in jail or whatever for the purposes of maintaining this propaganda that actually there is a war between ZANU-PF and Britain and USA, when in actual fact there isn't much of a war. But wars can happen, real wars, even though they are pretending that, even though they have this setup of being against Zimbabweans, God can steer a war between ZANU-PF and Britain. God can steer a real war that will make the US Army want ZANU-PF out of power. Even though they've been friends all along, God can change the situation such that those are the very same Americans and the very same British who hate us, ordinary Zimbabweans, who want to destroy our country so that they can have us as cheap labor. God can change geopolitics in the world in such a way that we as Zimbabweans will be attractive to the powerful in the world, and ZANU-PF will become an impediment to their to their uh, continued success or whatever. So in such a case, an evolution of society, or some kind of evolution within the geopolitics, some constraints that we've had as Zimbabweans are going to change. Our fortunes are going to change in such a way that ZANU-PF will fall out of favor with their masters, the British and the Americans. And I want to be clear when I talk about British and the American masters, that uh, people who throw that word very easily, like masters, they are masters. Whose masters are they? They're not really anybody's masters except for the fact that they are the superpower, which means that they have got the biggest military, they've got the highest resources, so therefore they've got the highest say, and whatever they want usually tends to happen, and God allows for that purpose. So that is why they really become the masters. Not that they are the master race or master people. It's just a position that God gave them, and God can also take it away from them anytime. So when I say God is going to help Zimbabweans, I want you to be clear that God can use anyone. And those people that God uses does not mean, therefore, that they are God themselves. Also, does not mean that God will carry on using them all the time. You see, God can use your enemy to bless you. Just because your enemy has blessed you does not mean that that enemy is now your friend. They might have done it not because they want to bless you. They might have done it because they wanted to deal with somebody else, but through you. So the Americans might use the freedom of Zimbabweans, okay, for another fight which has got nothing to do with Zimbabweans. Perhaps maybe a fight against China. All right. They might say, okay, we want to fight China. Therefore, the way of fighting China is to build presence in Africa. One way of doing it is removing it from power and putting a pro-American government in Zimbabwe that is going to influence the SADC region to tilt towards Washington. Not because they love black people in Southern Africa, no, but because they have got no choice but to counter the Chinese influence in Southern Africa. So in a situation like that, Idim Nangagwa gets out of power and gets out of favor with Britain itself, gets out of favor with the United States itself. So you begin to understand when those moves happen, it's not because Americans all of a sudden have got a liking for black people. No, it's because God has put them in a corner where they have got no choice but to change, but to transform. If the Americans carry on, let me show you something which is very interesting. If the Americans carry on with their arrogance and say they hate black people, it's the same thing. The Americans and the British are the same. If you look at the British Empire or the British Commonwealth, you will see all countries that are doing well are all white countries like Australia, uh, New Zealand, And if you look at South Africa, it's enclaves of South Africa where there is white people. It's the white economy of South Africa that is doing well, but the black economy is suffering. But then if you look at countries like Jamaica, Haiti, where there's black people, those are ex-British colonies, there is poverty and suffering. I always say it's deliberate. It's what King Charles and his guys there at Buckingham Palace want. But now God has put them in a position whereby if they keep on being condescending, if they keep on with their condescending attitude towards Black Africa, now God has raised China. All right, China is able to use its soft power in Africa, in Latin America. Before you know it, they will take over the world and become the next superpower and crush United States and crush United Kingdom through China and Russia. Do you understand? So them, even though America thinks it's the superpower, God can raise China. And by the way, God raised China because of the arrogance of Washington. If Washington was not arrogant and did help Africa for the sake of helping Africa, instead of saying, "Oh, you are just black," so in South Africa, all black people or most black people in South Africa, especially here where I am in Cape Town, most black people live in squalid condition, in terrible conditions, in shacks, not even proper housing. Yet this country is one of the biggest economies in Africa. But the white people stay in the best places ever. You see, that is deliberate. Okay. So that is the arrogance of this race, these racists in Washington, in New York, and in London. So God has raised China to counter that balance. Now China comes into Africa, and now the Americans and the British have got no choice. Okay, they've got no choice but to bless us. They've got no choice but to stop supporting their regime in Harare that was put in there for the purposes of destroying the institutions and the value of the black labor man. You understand that in capitalism, everything is capital. Political capital, financial capital, economic capital, military capital, intellectual capital, everything is capital. So they use all of that capital for the purposes of destroying the institutions of the Zimbabwean government, so that whatever gain that is accrued through educating Zimbabweans through Robert Mugabe's policies is going to be destroyed through destroying our governance system, but still using the valuable Zimbabwean labor at a very low price. So that is what capital has done to attack us as Zimbabweans. Here in Southern Africa, remember, Rhodesia used to be Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. During the wave of this wave of decolonization, uh, the white capital that was in Malawi and Zambia decided to give up on Malawi and Zambia and 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 um, and will go to Fort Salisbury and defend their capital in Zimbabwe. So that is why Zambia and Malawi got that independence without going through a war, because they made a conscious decisions to to defend their territory, to defend Zimbabwe only. It was difficult for them to be scattered all over the place when they came to one place. So with the war in Zimbabwe, they've lost that war, and therefore they came down south. Now they are in South Africa. Okay, that is why there's a war in Gauteng. That is why they're now coming to Cape Town, and they now want Western Cape to be a separate province. This is actually the move of white capital, British or European Orient, British capital, or people that come from Europe that are now in Africa. So they still have the same mentality. That is why you see Zimbabweans in South Africa, you see Zambians in South Africa, you see Congolese, you see the Malawans, you see all these guys from Southern Africa coming to South Africa to get jobs. Do you know why? Because white capital in South Africa has got this hegemony over Southern African region, destabilizing governments, including the ANC. Okay, so for the purposes of never letting black people to be free, so that black people can be cheap labor for where in South Africa, where the white people are, where their factories are, where their business interests are. So not only do they get cheap South African black people labor, but also cheap black Zimbabwean, cheap black Zambians, cheap black Mozambicans, and all of those things. And through this thing of having foreigners in South Africa with limited rights, and they will never really give them the rights. So those limited rights actually add to the cheapening of that labor. So that is the interest of white people, as far as black people are concerned. You will see, like in the case of the ZTP permits, there is a white organization that helps Zimbabweans to extend this ZEP. You would think that these white people, they like Zimbabweans. No, they don't. It is in their economic interest to have Zimbabweans stay longer in South Africa so that they can keep on exploiting them. So this exploitation comes as if it is a favor. So Zimbabweans celebrate when ZTP permits are extended because they think that is a favor. It's not really a favor. The capital actually needs that so that they can have US cheap labor. Zimbabweans celebrate when the United Kingdom opens up its borders to take Zimbabwean nurses, and for them to work in these ships to work in America where they are working in a restaurants or whatever. And so all of that, including the restaurant work that we do in South Africa, all of those things are actually an attack by capital on the Zimbabwean labor. So the purpose of cheapening Zimbabwean labor. So as low wage earners, Zimbabweans voluntarily go to the United Kingdom or USA or Canada, thinking that is a better deal, but not knowing that your country has been destroyed by the very same people that you're going to work for in USA and UK, that the very same people that I destroyed your nation, but without you knowing, for the purposes of you giving up on building your own country and going to work them for a fee that is higher than what you get in your own country. Therefore, it appears or to the Zimbabwean that it's a better deal. Yet it's not the best deal. You know the verse that said that God sometimes closes certain doors because He knows what is best for you. So what I'm saying that it's not best for the Zimbabweans to go to the UK and the USA. What is best for the Zimbabweans is go to Zimbabwe, become professional teachers, doctors, and be high value and be paid high value salaries through a governance system that works for all Zimbabweans, that works purposefully or specifically for Zimbabweans. So we need to go back to Zimbabwe and build our country and build our systems that will add high value. See, we talk about the value creation, value addition in the mining industry. I also need you to look at the value creation and value addition in the human resources industry. As a human being yourself, as a Zimbabwean person, your value is increased the more you develop yourself. You develop your education, your skill base, your ability to become influential and useful in society. That value, I need you to come back to Zimbabwe and cultivate that value at home, where we begin to bless each other for the purposes of value additioning of the people, and then we're able to sell our value to the whole world. By the way, the British understood that. That's the reason why they came up with economic structural adjustment program in the 1989s, no, 1990 to 1995. Robert Mugabe was coerced into accepting that ASAP from the IMF. By the way, in IMF is also just a wing of the US and British hegemony around the world. So it was an attack to destroy the economy of Zimbabwe, because if they didn't do that, I don't believe in austerity, by the way. I don't believe that austerity is the best way of developing an economy. On the contrary, I believe that if a country is indebted, it has to take more debt, but work through work through the economy so that they can be able to pay their debt or restructure their debt in such a way that it is sustainable. The United States itself has got a very high debt that they will never repay, including the United Kingdom itself. Their debt is also becoming bigger and bigger, and they will never pay that thing back. Do you know why? Because economy grows on debt. Any economic growth that is serious, it is fueled by debt, and debt that is always going to have to be rolled on over and over again. So that is what I believe, and that's what IMF knew. But instead, ASAP and all other related austerity programs, they bring a counter argument and ask countries to do the opposite of growing through debt. They talk about repaying, balancing your budget, and whatever. Those are the things that actually destroy the economy. Okay, so but they do it purposefully. They do it knowing what they're doing, but they brand it as if it's what the country need to do, when they know very well, those sons of devils, they know very well what they're doing. So Robert Mugabe didn't understand that part. So he fell into that IMF trap and enacted ASAP. All right. So I've got a plan. All right, but I'm not gonna tell you what the plan is unless the devil worshippers listen to my plan and try to figure out how to destroy it. I've got a plan which is not ASAP. I've got a plan of creating an environment where our country can go forward without austerity, but it's increasing our economy through different types of debt instruments that are at our disposal that we can actually create if we have got a government that is geared towards fighting unemployment, seeking full employment, and fighting to keep the inflation low, and also an arrangement where our currency is more stabilized. It will give impetus for us to experience a massive economic growth if we get our if we get our hands in power. You know, we, the Zimbabweans, as the patriots who truly love the country, not the liars, not the elite who use proximity to power or political power is some kind of capital that they add to their own military capital and their financial capital for the purposes of further wealth extraction. So I think that Zimbabwe has been extracted enough, not just by the generals in Zimbabwe or the comrades in ZANU-PF, but also by the global West in the United States and United Kingdom, and also now China and Russia as well. So, actual fact, my people in Zimbabwe, I just like. I mean, this girl who is being raped by everybody, the whole world, including your own father. Can you imagine you're a girl, a group of guys come and rape you, you scream, another group of guys here that you're screaming, they come and fight off those guys so that they can rape you as well. Then your family members, your own father comes as well, seeing that you've been raped by different men. He also comes with his brothers and they rape you as well. That's what's happening to the Zimbabweans. The father of the Zimbabweans, which is Itim Nangagwa, is raping his own Zimbabweans, helping also the Chinese and the Russians, together with the old rapists who are also still playing with the rest of the nation, which is the United States and the United Kingdom. You begin to discover right now that almost everybody is an enemy of a black Zimbabwe. Everybody. You're going to ask me, so if everybody is an enemy of Zimbabweans and benefiting, who's going to save us? The Bible says that, God says that in the book of Isaiah, it says, I looked down on my people and found that there is no one to save them. And then the Bible says that the Bible says, and the Lord said, I, with my hand, shall go down and save my own people. So as we can see now, that very same thing, that same thing that happened in the book of Isaiah, when God prophesied about nobody saving his people around the earth, because he was seeing the Israelites being oppressed and nobody was able to save the Israelites from their oppression because everybody was involved in this orgy of oppressing the Israelites. In the same breath, everybody is involved in this orgy of oppressing Zimbabweans, whether it is the Zimbabwean government in Harare, which is ZANU-PF, whether it is Triple C, which is pretending to be opposing, whether they try to protect the gold mafia, or it is the ANC next door with their through their quiet diplomacy, which is actually meant to keep ZANU-PF in power because Thabo Mbeki and the ANC are destroying Zimbabwe, or even the white capital in South Africa, which has got this hegemony over all black people in Southern Africa for the purposes of creating low wage earners, or whether it is the British billionaires in the city of London, in Britain, in British Parliament, or in King Charles Court, who are also interested in destroying Zimbabwe for their own various reasons, including their embedded racism and trying to create a weak labor force or cheaper labor in Zimbabwe, or it is the rich Americans who need the Zimbabweans to go work in their golf clubs for cents on the dollar, or it is the Chinese and the Russians now who are involved in mineral extraction in Zimbabwe. So you begin to see that it's a whole group of all major people. All of them have got a stake in the Zimbabwean woman to rape. All of them have got a stake for raping, and none of them have got a stake for helping. As the word of God says in the book of Isaiah, that I saw that there's no one who's saving my people, but I, the Lord, extended my hand to save my people. So I'm telling you, therefore, that the Zimbabweans are going to be saved by the Lord. Okay, there is nobody in the world who's going to save us except the Lord. Not even me speaking, I'm speaking the word of the Lord, that this is what the Lord is going to do. The Lord Himself is the one who's going to bring salvation. Because even if I speak, okay, even if I speak right now, the Zimbabweans who are listening to me, they think that I'm a joke, or they think that this is just rubbish. Okay, so they would rather listen to the propaganda of Triple C and ZANU-PF to make them give them this hopium. I call it hopium. It's like a drug. It's a hope. It's a mix of hope and opium. It's opium. It's a drug, thinking that things are going to change. Things won't change under this current arrangement of eating Nangagwa and Nestle Chamisa. They are both Makaranga, and they want to keep on eating together. They have got no interest whatsoever in changing the status quo. So when the Zimbabweans are being fed that opium, and I know after the elections, ZANU PF is going to come out as the winner, and the Triple C is going to complain. And you know the story, we'll go to court, and then the court is going to declare that 81 fair and fair. SADC, what can SADC do? Because they've got mines in Zimbabwe. They're going to say that it was fair and fair, together with African Union, including the European Union, because they're interested in keeping ZANU-PF in power. As I've been telling you, that the British and the Europeans and the Americans have got no interest in regime change. If they wanted regime change, they would have done it a long time ago. I'm talking about the United States of America and NATO. Those are the guys who removed Gaddafi in one day. They removed what's his name in Iraq. They removed that guy. What's his name? Saddam Hussein in one day. They, they can, if they say there's weapons of mass destruction. I'm talking about guys who can do anything that they want at any time. I'm talking about the guys who organize the Banana Republic. I mean, I'm talking about the CIA. I'm talking about people that are always changing regimes all over the world anytime they want, anytime they. So you tell me that in these 20, 30 years, the United States and UK have been trying to remove ZANU-PF? No, they have not been trying. This is my argument. The United States and the United Kingdom have never wanted regime change in Zimbabwe, and they still don't want regime change in Zimbabwe. However, the propaganda is to make you think that they want regime change, to feed you this opium. In the meanwhile, when they say 2000, 2001, 2005, 2010, 15, 20, 23, 30, you are still going to be suffering as Zimbabweans, being cheap labor until 2050, 2070, 2300, 20 whenever. So you'll be given this opium. They do not want regime change. All right, please put this thing in your thick skulls, Zimbabweans. There is no Britain or USA that wants regime change in Zimbabwe. They want you as cheap labor, because if there's a regime change and you have got a government that loves its people, all the cheap labor in Zimbabweans who are very well educated, but they're working for cents on the dollar in UK and USA, are gonna come back home. Their value is going to be realized, and they will produce goods and produce products that will compete with the global West, and we will begin to have another China in Africa. So that fear, it causes them to tremble. So they will never want a government that loves black people to be in power. Look at what they did to Patrice Lumumba and DRC. Look what they've done to Thomas Sankara. Look at here in South Africa what they've done to the black leaders that were pro blacks. What is his name? His name is running away from my mind right now. The South African black leader that was pro-black, who disappeared. Then Nelson Mandela came with a compromise that made the white people keep all the wealth and the black people still poor and becoming cheap labor, with an education system which is not up to scratch, so that the DA can now talk about meritocracy, whilst knowing very well that there is no merit in a group of people that you bombarded with alcohol abuse and drug abuse in the locations, with the festering with poverty and underinvestment in education, comparing them against the white kids who whose education system was well funded, and their suburbs are well secure. So as they grow, don't tell me about meritocracy. That's just nonsense. You understand what I'm talking about? So you have got to understand now, therefore, that the battle of the British and the Americans is to keep that Zimbabwean labor force to be cheap and to contain Zimbabwe through putting a governance system that will make sure that it will not build its own people. So when Zimbabweans get to a point of maturity, of understanding that their enemy is not only limited to ZANU-PF, but it also extends to their so-called Triple C opposition, including their sponsors, Britain and America. At the same time, the Chinese and the Russians are also at it in this orgy, that they will realize the orgy of corruption, the orgy of abuse by all the people of the world against a black man in Southern Africa. That is when you're going to realize that the only help is in Isaiah, when the Lord said that I looked down at my people and I found that there is nobody who can save them, but the hand of the Lord itself shall come down from heaven and begin to be the one that is going to save the people. So in all of this video, in all of my saying, is for driving out the point, to drive the point home, that it is going to be the Lord's doing, and Zimbabwe will be free. And whatever it is that the Lord is going to do, or whoever it is that the Lord is going to use, it is the Lord's glory. As I say that the Americans and the British, God has put them in a corner, and God is already currently testing them. You see, I told you that if the British and the Americans carry on with their arrogance of hating black people and thinking that this strategy of destroying Zimbabwe, giving them a pariah government for the purposes of cheapening our labor. Now, well, God has got another ace, has got another card, China. China uh, softening its relations with Africa, and it gets to a place where their influence can grow beyond Washington. Before you know it, Washington will not have any influence anywhere in Africa or in South America, in key resource countries that matter. And China will have an overhand and overpower and America and be able to do more and begin to lead a new free world. So as USA is fighting back China, they too have got no choice but to eat humble pie and begin to see that it's a black man who's going to save who's going to save the empire of America. It's going to be a black man in Africa whom Washington has, by force, has to partner with for the purposes of building Africa so that America can all still maintain its influence. Because if they do not do that, China will do it. So here's the thing, who's going to come first? Is it going to be the Americans who will maintain their hegemony over the world by helping Africans, or they are going to carry on with their policy of disregarding Africa, and China is going to use that to its advantage? I don't care who it is. I don't care whether it's America or it's China. All I know is that Jehovah is going to create conditions that are conducive so that those that are more powerful than us will have no choice but to bless us because we have found favor in his eyes. Holy is the Lord. My name is Ngobani, and I intend and I'm already leading my country out of the pain and the imperialism of everybody else. Have a great afternoon.